Pushkins were an old noble family. In Alexander Pushkin's lifetime, they had belonged to nobility for 7 centuries. The Pushkins served Russia faithfully and loyally in the civil and military pursuits for 700 years. They owned the Boldino lands for 3 centuries, developing its wealth and caring for the peasants who lived there. Gavrila Aleksich, a historic figure, is listed in the 4th generation of this family tree. He served under Alexander Nevsky, and during the Battle of Lake Peipus, or Battle on the Ice, was one of the first to cross to the other side, ensuring victory for the Russian forces. In the 7th generation, behind him is Grigory, nicknamed Pushka. That's where the family name Pushkin comes from. Alexander Pushkin is said to have been named after Alexander Nevsky, who was considered the Pushkin family's patron saint. The Pushkins received the Boldino lands from Ivan the Terrible, who distributed them after the conquest of the Mongol Tatars in order to strengthen the doomed borders of Russia and to maintain the feudal cavalry. As a way to increase their influence and power of the state, the Pushkins were forced to convert local population from paganism to Christianity. When assembling for war by order of Ivan the Terrible, the landed gentry had to provide 1 military slave from each chet of their land, about half a hectare, and they themselves were obliged to arrive mounted, manned and armed, as per the decree, accompanied by another guard who would look after the owner and his military slave. And that was the core of the feudal cavalry. In the 17th century, the Pushkin family had great influence at court. They were pantlers, high-ranking nobility, known as Lokonji, and warlords locally referred to as voivodes. Those were people in power. 10 Pushkins signed up for Boris Godunov's reign, while 6 Pushkins did the same for the reign of the first of the Romanovs. Well, in general, they were a prototype of today's employees of the district, regional, or metropolitan administration. That's what these nobles were. Evstafi Pushkin was an okolnichi who accompanied the Tsars on his travels, identifying where stopovers would be. Back then, they were called abetis and ensured the Tsar's safety. So today, this would be the president's security detail. Boldino is known as Alexander Pushkin's retreat, where in 1830, 1833, and 1834, he wrote a total of 66 works. Just between us, I will tell you that in Boldino I have written as I had not written for a long time. Alexander Pushkin wrote his friend Pyotr Pletnyov, after spending a marvelous autumn in Boldino that gave the poet an extraordinary creative impetus. 34 poems, 7 short novels, including the Tales of Belkin, 5 fairy tales, 4 drama pieces, 3 poems, 3 complete chapters of his novel in verse, Eugene Onegin, 8 polemic pieces, a historical study of the Pugachev's rebellion, a prosaic piece for his short novel, The Egyptian Nights. What is the secret of Boldino's autumn? Everyone unravels it differently. Some say that cholera was raging and there was a real risk of dying. Others say that he was in love, looking forward to his wedding. Yet others put it down to the family estate where more than 300 years the Pushkins had been creating a stunning, comfortable space of their manor. The most important thing, however, is the construction of the church. The secret of the Boldino autumn is therefore a blessing from on high by those heavenly powers that were particularly revered here. On August 31st, 1830, Pushkin left Moscow for Boldino. He spent only 4 days on the road, covering around 562 kilometers. Pushkin traveled by post-chaise, that is, using his own horse carriage, but always changing horses at post stations. Mileage allowance had to be paid for horses. 1 kilometer of horse run cost between 8 and 10 kopecks, depending on the road, even if a traveler tried to save money by traveling in his own horse carriage. He still had to pay at the stations to have the carriage wheels greased. As it is known, tar was used as a lubricant for the wheels, and the tar was made from birch bark. Alexander Pushkin was eager to settle down in Boldino. In 1834, in one of his letters to his wife, Natalia, he wrote, "God willing, I will find you healthy, and our children safe and sound, and the hell with St. Petersburg. I will resign and escape to Boldino to become landed gentry." In 1837, the Boldino peasant serfs were relocated to the new lands owned by the Pushkins, where people used to be exiled for offenses. This is how the settlement of Lvovka came to be, named as Sergei Pushkin wished to honor Lev Pushkin, his father and the poet's grandfather. Later, a park with shady linen and birch tree avenues was laid out here. They narrowed down the space, inviting you for a long walk. In front of the manor house is the small garden, followed by the middle garden and then the birch garden. Since 2005, the Lvovka country estate has housed the Museum of Literary Characters of the Tales of Belkin, which includes the peasant lady's room with furniture made of curly birch. The Boldino estate extends well beyond Boldino itself. The museum and preserve currently takes up 52 hectares of land, including 16.4 hectares in Boldino, 9.5 hectares in the Boldino Park, 26 hectares in the Luchinik Grove, and 9.6 hectares in Lvovka. In the 19th century, Alexander Pushkin's father owned the southeastern half of Boldino and the village of Kistinyovo, from where 200 male peasant serfs with their families were granted to the poet shortly before his marriage. We are now in the Pushkin's manorial banya, or steam bath. Pushkin is well known to have loved the Russian banya, acquiring a taste for it in the days of his childhood. Let us recall the lines from his poet Ruslan and Ludmila. But first the warrior is led to a Russian bath all steaming. Each charming and half-naked maid ministers to him tenderly. All crowd around him, grant their aid, plying sweet service gracefully. For over him one maiden waves birch branches. A Russian banya is always associated with a birch banya besum. It is ideal in every way. Birch trees' branches are very supple and whippy, while their leaves remain elastic even after they have dried out. During the besum massage, the leaves draw out toxins and waste substances from the body. To ensure all these properties, birch besums should be made properly. The perfect banya birch besums are made of branches cut around Pentecost. This is the time of the year when birches gain strength and a lot of valuable substances accumulate in the leaves. Most importantly, leaves should not be too hard. The Boldino Estate Park was not laid out until after Alexander Pushkin had died. It has 2 birch trees avenues. In the early 19th century, estate parks were designed to make people feel part of nature and integrated with the environment. Walking in parks played a special role at that time. So the paths were laid out for a morning walk. Such paths were the shortest of all, and there were no dark leaves or dark water along the way. There was a whole day ahead, so the morning mood was very important. Of the 1,500 trees in the Pushkin Estate Park, 30% are silver birch, 20% are small-leaved linden, and 16% are white willow. Spruce evoked the darkness of northern forests, while birch was supposed to induce joy and celebration. There should also be places in parks where one could experience fear and ostensibly getting lost. This is what estate parks were meant for. A day walk was longer, but the longest one was in the evening. It usually ended at a spot from where one could see the sunset as well. So the Birch Avenue in Boldino ends at Buravushkina Hill, from where the sunset can be enjoyed in full. Such views make one think about the future. We usually live in the future, somehow not noticing the present as it runs by. The birch tree has the most number of lines dedicated to it by Russian poets and writers. What is surprising, however, is that until the mid-19th century, birch hardly had any references in literature. In fact, birch was seen more fit for household purposes. It was used, after all, mainly to make birch bark utensils, furniture, or various bowls, and, of course, for firewood. We are now in the Office of Estates, as it was called in the 19th century, but it had other names too: a serf, loan, or proscript, izba, or log house. It was used for the landlord's business purposes, and at times as a place that punished peasants for their misdeeds. An interesting case was on in Boldino during one of the Alexander Pushkin's visits. The forest warden brought a timber thief to the proscript office for trial and punishment. The birch, that is, flogging with rods. At that time, there were peasants in the office, and Alexander Pushkin sat among them. The timber thief grew more scared, and when he saw the landlord, Pushkin asked what the matter was. The forest warden said the man had cut down a birch in the nearest grove. The tearful peasant swore by God that he had cut down the birch for Luchina, wood slivers used as miniature torches. His house needed lighting, but he had no means to buy the birch. Luchina was the cheapest kind of lighting. Even when kerosene lamps became available, people would not buy kerosene. No one wanted to spend money on it, preferring to use the Luchina miniature torches. Then Pushkin ordered to vacate the punishment, saying, "Don't fell the trees as yet. The grove is still young and will turn into real Luchinik. Then it will serve you well." The grove you see is a natural landmark called Luchinik, a grove of trees for making Luchina. It got its name thanks to the poet's good graces. It is here, in a glad among the white-trunk birch trees, that the All Russia Pushkin Poetry Festival is held annually. This was one of Alexander Pushkin's favorite walking spots. Also, most of the time, Pushkin came here on horseback. So he would come here, tying his horse to a tree, and stayed around for a long time. Luchina miniature torches were inserted in a special holder called svitits. It took some skill to properly put a Luchina in its holder. If titled too little, it can go out easily. An excessive tilt will make it burn too quickly. Luchinas would be titled slightly in its holder, at an angle of about 15 to 20 degrees. Luchinas can burn for a long time, for up to 30 minutes. To make them burn longer, they can also be steeped in lard or fat. The burn rate could be controlled by adjusting the Luchina tilt. A small log trough with water would be put under the holder in order to prevent fires. It served as a collector for ashes and coals from burning Luchinas. One of the children would be put on duty to keep Luchinas constantly burning. Their task was to replace Luchinas in time, also making sure to prevent a fire. Sometimes, several Luchinas were lit for brighter light. There were no matches back then, and fire kept burning in stoves. That was the way to have fire readily available in the old days. With the advent of matches, they became widely used to make things easier. But before that, good care had been taken to keep the fire burning, with something always alight in the stove. So on long winter evenings, by the light of Luchinas, men would weave bast shoes and purses, chatting away leisurely. Women did needlework, knitting, spinning, weaving. Remember Pushkin's lines. A virgin singing in the hut is spinning and the friend of night, a splinter cracking at her side. The Boldino estate was just a few kilometers from the Mordovian lands. In the 16th century, Ivan the Terrible pushed away the Mordovians along with the Tatars, but some of their settlements can still be found in the Nizhny Novgorod region. When the Pushkins owned Boldino, next to it was the estate of Pushkin, which means linden tree in Mordovian. For a long time, the people living in Pushkin and Bolshoi Boldino were on good terms, celebrating holidays together. In the morning, they would bake karavai, bread and pies, invite guests, weave wreaths, and take part in circle dances. Pushkin was owned by Vasily Anikiv, and Boldino belonged to the Pushkins. The landowners got on very well, and so did their peasants. Birch branches were used to decorate homes. It was believed that this way God would enter the house and bless the whole family. People walked around the village with a felled and decorated birch tree, singing Pentecost songs. Young girls, a symbol of purity, went to a birch grove where they decorated a birch tree with ribbons, beads, and kerchiefs. It all went on until the two landlords got alienated. The Pushkins had a peasant woman who cleaned the office of estates, and when Alexander Pushkin visited, she tidied up his room too. Alexander Pushkin took a keen interest in the life of ordinary people, and apart from visiting the office of estates, he could also stop on ordinary peasants. If he met someone on his walks in the village, or in the Luchiny Grove, be it a man or a woman, he would always strike up a conversation, trying to learn as much as he could about peasant life. He was interested in different aspects, be it folklore or everyday life or something else. A clerk from Pushkin, who worked for Anikiv, came to Boldino to see his friend, and he met that woman named Aksnia. Well, a wedding was in order soon. Aksnia was willing. But what of the peasant serfs owners? There were no doubts about Pushkin, he would agree. But what would Anikiv say? Alexander Pushkin was fluent in the Russian vernacular, which helped him win over ordinary people very quickly. That was the secret of success, to belong with ordinary peasants. Anikiv allowed the clerk to propose to Aksnia and immediately wrote a letter to Alexander Pushkin offering him a similar peasant woman in return before proceeding to marriage. To which Pushkin replied, "I am not some kind of gypsy to exchange people like horses. If Aksnia wants to get married, if she is willing, let her marry, I won't object." Having received that answer, Anikiv got very angry and said, "One may call me a gypsy, but I am no woman's or man's gossip monger, like Alexander Pushkin, who wanders around the villages collecting other people's rumors." Well, there was one rumor going around. Anikiv was said to have exchanged several peasant families from the village of Znaminka for a patch of forest from Landover Beklemishiv. Anikiv was very worried about Pushkin's caustic pen. What would happen if Pushkin wrote about it, letting other gentry know about this incident? Anikiv still allowed the wedding, making no obstacles. Yet, the friendly relations between the Pushkins and the Anikivs soured after that. And so did the friendship between their peasants. Alexander Pushkin first came to Boldino before his marriage to Natalia Goncharova to take possession of the village of Kistinyovo, which could bring around 4,000 rubles a year in cash revenue from the peasants. Lending 11,000 rubles to the would-be mother-in-law for the bride's dowry was one of the conditions of marriage. To this end, Pushkin collateralized his Kistinyovo peasants in 1830. In 1834, he wanted to buy the second part of the Boldino estate, which had belonged to his uncle, but his uncle's part was auctioned off to landowner Zibin. One part of Boldino was Pushkin's, officially the first community, and the other part, officially the second community, was called the Zibin estate. This grove would have been cut down but for the efforts of Boldino peasants from the first Boldino community. These were the Pushkins' former serf peasants. They managed to convince this commission that the grove should be preserved. So, only sanitation cutting was down, giving this grove a new look. Thanks to these peasants who, in fact, preserved both the estates and the grove, today we can enjoy this forest and this natural landmark. After the October Revolution, the village meeting of Boldino peasants on April 11, 1918 passed the following resolution. We wish for this estate with its house and an outbuilding as well as other buildings and the orchard to be registered with our Soviet attending to and keeping it under our supervision in its original place to perpetuate the memory of the great poet, our landowner, Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, as well as the date of the Great Russian Revolution, after discussion of which we unanimously decided to put this estate, with its building and structures, the orchard, into the protective register. The Boldino estate is also known for being one of the few to have been purchased by the Russian government in March 1911 by resolution of the Council of Ministers. Avoiding burning or demolition, this estate was fully preserved after the Russian October Revolution. This was because Pushkin's peasants loved their landlord and understood his significance for Russia. Alexander Pushkin is credited not only with the creation of the Russian literary language or his ability to form and cherish friendships, but also with his distinctive attitude towards the Boldino peasants. In essence, He was the great communicator of the 19th century, who had a higher regard for human capital, for land, and other forms of property. Under serfdom, the most important asset was the serf peasants. But once serfdom was abolished, land became the most important asset.